Mass protests growing across China as protesters demand an end to the strict COVID measures and lockdowns.
Meanwhile, here in stateside, critics accusing the White House of being too soft in its response to those Chinese protesters pushing back against their communist leader.
All right, White House National Security Council Coordinator John Kirby, Admiral Kirby, is here to respond. Admiral, how do you feel about the lack of firmness in the response from the administration? Is there a reason why we're being so soft about and not supporting fully the protesters on the ground and what they're standing for, along with the journalists that are getting beaten?
Hey, Brian, good morning to you all. Good to be with you guys. I would not say at all that we would agree with criticism that we've been less than firm or consistent. In fact, Brian, we've been very, very consistent about the right of peaceful protest, and we've been very vocal about it in China just over the last few days. We believe that these individuals should be able to peacefully protest and assemble and to make their minds known to their government there in China, just like we've said the same in Iran and around the world. And we stand up for peaceful protests. And again, we've been very consistent about that.
Well, absolutely. The White House is always for peaceful protests. But, John, you know what the protesters are saying. They're saying, hey, Xi Jinping's got to go. Or loosen the COVID restrictions that are keeping people stuck in their houses for months. So between he's got to go or loosen restrictions, which side is the White House on when it comes to supporting the protesters?
Steve, we're on the side of peaceful protest. We're on the side of individuals being able to freely assemble and to express their views, whatever those views are. We're not taking a side in terms of what these protesters are about. Largely, though, Steve, you know that these protesters are really out there about the lockdown. Their main concern, 100%. What drove them to the streets, was the very severe, very stringent COVID policies by Xi's administration, and that's what's really been driving all this public protest.
You said the president is not going to speak for the protesters. You got a lot of criticism for that because many are saying, well, they can't speak for themselves. They risk being beaten or arrested. Yeah. Dan Crenshaw tweeted, why is it so hard for this administration to support freedom? Pure cowardice. What do you say?
We were not, what I meant by saying that was that we're not going to put our words into their mouths. I mean, they are speaking for themselves. They are out in the streets. They are braving the elements to make clear what their views are. So they are speaking for themselves, and we stand up for the right of every citizen around the world to be able to speak up freely and peacefully for what they believe in. That's what I was talking about. It's not about us inserting our language or our rhetoric into what they want to talk about.
So here's what they said. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson put this out there. The price of freedom in the U.S., 1 million COVID deaths, 40,000 gun deaths per year, and more than 100,000 fentanyl deaths in 2021 alone. By the way, they're responsible for that. The American people deserve something far better than that. What we want is to protect our people's lives and ensure them a better life. So, Admiral, by you stepping back and having a weak response, that's the thanks you get. In your face, their propaganda.
I don't think, first of all, Brian, I would disagree that we're taking a step back or we got a weak response. We've been very clear and consistent, and very publicly so. Number two, I don't think we're going to take lessons or advice about freedom from the PRC. That we have been working very, very hard here in the United States to move past this pandemic, getting people vaccinated, making it obvious and clear about what the information that you need to get well out there is, and putting therapeutics out there, and of course making sure that we're staying ahead of each and every variant. We've been very, very aggressive about that, and we don't believe here in the United States that lockdowns are the answer. What's the answer is more vaccines, getting people more informed, getting them ready to deal with this as these new variants evolve and change.
Right. Well, as you have said, the White House supports the protesters. You know, in the past, John, the protesters there in China have been able to use their Apple phones and airdrop from one protester to another to avoid censorship. But now Apple in China has changed, apparently, the technology so that airdrop only works for like 10 minutes now. What is the White House's response to it? It appears they are essentially helping the government of China clamp down on the protesters being able to freely communicate with each other.
Well, Apple should speak to their decisions as a corporate entity, of course.
Yeah, but you're standing up for the protesters. The protesters want to communicate, and Apple is making that impossible.
In general, Steve, and you know this, we've talked about this many times, we want to make sure that as people freely assemble and protest, that they have access to as much information as possible and are able to share information with one another. We're always in favor of open, free communications with citizens around the world.
Let's talk about the Defense Department's annual report, because it is saying that Biden's fumbled withdrawal from Afghanistan was a propaganda gift to China. Do you agree with that?
No, I do not. And I don't know that that's the Pentagon's assessment that it was a propaganda gift to China. If anything, nations like China and Russia took a look at what we did in Afghanistan, and we've talked about this many, many times over the last year, and had to marvel at the speed, the efficiency, and the effectiveness that a very small number of troops, Brian, you listen to me now, hear me out. A small number of troops were able to move that many Afghans safely out of that country. No other nation in the world can do that.
The way you withdrew is the issue, Admiral. The way our military moved in and out is a separate issue. Your Defense Department claimed, as part of its annual report to Congress on national security developments, they suggest that China capitalized on the withdrawal to convince world leaders the U.S. is not a reliable ally. It's not Brian Kilmeade talking. It's your Defense Department. The PRC employed multiple diplomatic tools in an attempt to erode U.S. and partner influence, and it highlights the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The death of 13 and how many people we got out, that's one issue. But the way we did it, the way we promised that government would stand up, the way we were going to leave and have a transition, the disaster that took place is one of the many problems, along with the soldiers that are suffering now by the way you ended that 20-year war, not you, but the administration, is that China is using it, and you could argue that Russia invaded Ukraine because of it.
Brian, so the report said that China attempted to capitalize on it. That's a big difference from saying that they did or were able to capitalize on this. I mean, they spread propaganda about everything, Brian. You know that. But look at
how do you rate the way we left?
How strongly the international community has rallied around Ukraine. China has not been able to succeed in trying to convince people that that was some sort of weakness by the United States.
As a military officer, forget about the people that got out because the government collapsed that you promised wouldn't. How do you characterize the way we left Afghanistan? Because most clear-thinking people say worse than the embarrassment of Saigon. What do you say?
I'll say the same thing to you, Brian, here today that I've said to you many, many times in the past. We have admitted and acknowledged that not everything about the withdrawal was done perfectly, that there were certainly mistakes made. We've investigated those mistakes. We've owned up for those mistakes.
The president never been briefed on it. The president has not taken a briefing. I know this for a fact. They had a report put together about what we're running in Afghanistan. The president wouldn't even take an oral brief on it. Why is that, Admiral?
It was the right thing to do for the president to end our war in Afghanistan, Brian. It was the right thing to bring our troops home. It was the right thing to be able to focus on other challenges like China and like Russia.
1,000 people in Afghanistan does not get your eye off the ball. We have a massive military. You could have left a few thousand in there and stopped what we're witnessing now, which is a terror haven for al-Qaeda. And guess what?
Brian,
bin Laden's son is now back there.
Ask some al-Qaeda leaders how safe they feel in Afghanistan right now after we just took out Zawahiri.
You killed one. There are thousands back.
The titular leader of al-Qaeda inside Afghanistan, not just one, not just some guy on a street corner, Brian. It was a very, very carefully executed and very, very effective
How many
strike.
back? How many ISIS and al-Qaeda are back?
We said that al-Qaeda would be back in Afghanistan even before we left. They were starting to move back in, Brian, and we're watching it very closely. And the fact that we were able to execute that strike, the leader, by the way, not just some guy on a street corner, but the leader tells you that our over-the-horizon counterterrorism capabilities are actually quite effective.
So he's the only one. If you had over-the-horizon capabilities, you would have killed more than one because thousands are back.
Brian, it is not about killing every single terrorist around the world on any given day. We watch these threats carefully, and when they develop to a degree where we think our national security is at risk, we take action, and we did that.
Have left. Our assets have left.
We have over-the-horizon. Brian, we have over-the-horizon capabilities. You and I have talked about this. I'm not saying that we have every single asset available to us that we did a year or so ago, but we have enough, and we're working to improve them every single day.
John Kirby joining us from the North Lawn of the White House. John, it's always great to have you and getting the point of view from the White House. Sir, thank you very much.
You
More
bet.
Fox
Good to be
and
with you
Friends.
guys.